Okay, we are now recording, as you hopefully heard on your devices. So welcome everyone to our weekly call, which this week the main focus of the conversation is going to be around split DNS, or as it's often referred to, split horizon DNS, which has suddenly provoked a flurry of discussion on the ADD mailing list for those of you that follow such matters. And it's intentionally sort of themed on that this week, given that 3 of the IETF working groups, that is ADD, DNS Ops and Deprive, have actually got together and scheduled a joint interim, sort of virtual interim session midweek this week on the same topic, but focus more on discovery in the context of split horizon. So I thought it would be helpful just to take a step back and focus more on what are the use cases for split horizon DNS, so that when we get into the session later in the week, hopefully at least some of us will be starting from the same sort of point in terms of how discovery could be appropriately applied. So that's the plan. There's a few other things we'll cover after that discussion, but I'm delighted to say that Kevin has agreed or was volunteered and couldn't think of a plausible excuse quickly enough, whichever way around you look at it, to sort of kick this discussion off. For people that aren't aware, Kevin is the co-author of a current internet draft on split DNS, which has sort of, I think, just been updated within the last week. So I'd like Kevin to talk to the use cases as he sees them, then see if any others have got additional use cases to add in, and no doubt along the way we'll have a discussion about some of the points arising. So without further ado, Kevin, I'll hand over to you. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andrew. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Smith of Vodafone. And Andrew kindly said I was a co-author of the spec. That's possibly stretching it a bit. My name is on the spec, but really it's Tyrio and Dan who've done all the work. I'm there to pick up the occasional typo and also to give some validity to why operators might be interested in work in this space. So with Vodafone, we're a mobile operator, operate globally. We also have fixed networks as well, but my experience is mainly in the mobile space. And today we utilize split DNS. And one of the main historic reasons for that is because mobile operators are licensed. In most countries, they have to purchase license for spectrum from a government authority. And as part of that license, they typically have to adhere to some government obligations and regulations. So the reasons we utilize split DNS are really for 2 behaviors kind of related to that. The first is if we should be giving a different answer to a DNS query, depending on if the customer identifier points to an adult or not. By default, certainly in my experience in the UK, for example, by default, a customer identifier will say this is not an adult. You will have to, for example, go into a Vodafone store or another operator store, provide some verification. You'll be verified as an adult, and then from then on the DNS can start to say, okay, you are an adult and we can treat you slightly differently to anyone who's not proven to be so. And obviously the use case for that, as you can imagine, is where the country has a parental control system. In the UK it's a code of practice, for example, where operators have to have this distinction in place. So kids get sent to a holding page of some kind, adults get sent to the real destination IP address. Now, in some territories, as I say, the UK, for example, that applies to everyone from a code of practice. It may also be in other territories that we have a product, as I believe other operators do as well, which allows parents who control their child's subscription to say, okay, I want you to be filtering their behavior, let's say their requests. So that's the first kind of behavior, depending on if the customer is a proven adult or not. The second is simply giving a different answer to public DNS resolvers, but kind of in all cases. And there's a few reasons for that. One is malicious domain blocking. Of course, public resolvers can also do this. They do a very good job of, searching out malware sites and trying to block them. The other is lists that we get. We get lists from national governments and also international lists from agencies such as Europol and Interpol on what's called the worst of the worst internet. As you can imagine, this is stuff like child sexual abuse material, terrorist sites, this kind of thing. And we're expected to apply those to block pages. So if we can see a DNS lookup for such a site, then we would send it to a blocking page. The other one is what's called court orders. So these are national lists based where someone has won a court case to say you have to block this site. And these are overwhelmingly things like giving away Premier League football for free, bypassing subscriptions, or maybe, video streaming sites, this kind of thing. Typically football. The other one is offshore gambling sites as well, because if you do offshore gambling, the government doesn't get the tax revenue from it, so they tend to take a dim view on such things. So that's those ones. The other one that we do, and some other operators may do, but is we do free education in certain markets. And this basically involves a browser or a client on the device looking up a certain free education URL, and all the educational content is hosted in the core network to save money and make it sustainable. So this is quite an important thing for us. We have 2 million students in Africa getting completely free education, no data charges, no education charges. If they try to access the URL from Wi-Fi, they simply get a page saying this is how you can get the free education, but you can't actually access it at the moment because you're on Wi-Fi and it needs to go through the cellular core. So those are the reasons we're doing it, like I say, historically and also at the moment. There's another case which I'm not sure if split DNS could solve, or I think split DNS could be a part of it possibly, and that's MEC, or edge computing. So this is where the application server is hosted in the core network of an operator, and it's hosted in a private address space, so it can't be resolved by public DNS. The reason behind this is that if you host it in the core network or closer to the point of access, you get lower latency, and that's good for virtual reality, certain games, etc. Yeah. So because it's in a private address space, it can't be resolved using a public DNS. And we would rather that there wasn't a case where an attempt is made to access a MEC application server using a public DNS. The DNS then falls back, fails, and then goes, okay, now I need to use the operator DNS. Because if MEC is all about low latency, having that kind of stuttering start isn't ideal, to be honest. So yeah, we'd be interested in exploring how anything in the split DNS draft could help us with that as well. Yeah, so that in a nutshell is it. That's the history of why we apply split DNS. So any questions on that? And it is tea o'clock here in the UK, so excuse me if I just take a quick slurp.
Thanks, Kevin, for a quick run through. So does that either throw up any questions, comments, points of clarification, or indeed additional use cases that people want to add into the mix that Kevin didn't cover in that sort of quick run through? And either post questions in the chat or use Zoom to raise your virtual hand as appropriate, I should have said. Not seeing any questions or comments. Anyone got any use cases that weren't covered there that they're sort of keen to add in?
I guess I'd like to say there's lots of other use cases besides those. This is Allison. And often they come about in the data center environment. So, I mean, probably people are just being quiet rather than not thinking of these other data use cases. I want to mention that in this framework, compliance is trying to drive people away from using the same domain namespaces for private address spaces and public address spaces. So there are pressures on at least some environments to get away from the kind of use case that says, well, in my data center, A.B.C.D, name dot some name is going to have private space, and then some name is going to have public space outside the data center. Although that's, you know, long time water under the bridge, so split DNS is still here to stay. But just to give a kind of a big picture, there's clearly many other use cases that are, you know, quite common. Maybe other people would like to chime in on that.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Just out of interest, so on the compliance point, you're saying that sort of use of split horizon is being sort of discouraged, presumably in order to sort of better segregate the namespaces and avoid the risk of leaks.
I think that it's a side effect, but there are controls under the NIST framework which try to separate those namespaces. So if you follow those controls, then you can get there. Those split, that kind of particular use case where split DNS is not as common, not as used. And I don't know if other people have that experience, but that's an experience that I've come across in my work.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, that was helpful. So what about other sort of use cases, or indeed other comments that people may have? Or for that matter, there are people sat there thinking that in whatever geography you're in, you just don't see much need or evidence of split DNS.
Andrew, Glenn here. So one sort of personal comment is I'll ask everybody to think about, if you work for a corporation or an organization and you work from home, as many of us do these days, are you living in a world today where you're using a split DNS effectively when you interact with your company or your organizational internal infrastructure? And looking at my own organization that I'm involved in, it's a very common tool that has been deployed. And I think one of the challenges we have in the crew that we've got today, and even the broad crew at the IETF, is that a lot of us tend to very much focus on the open internet as our sort of world that we try to architect in. And a lot of these deployments, while some of them do exist on, as we've heard from Kevin, we also find a lot of these deployments are being done internally by corporate InfoSec and IT folks who are following their internal best practices that may have not been updated in many years, but it's still how they run their internal infrastructure and pockets of that infrastructure throughout it. I know that like in a production world, in a movie studio, it's not uncommon to find we have highly isolated networks that have production going on them, but in which the access to in and out of them is very much gated through both firewalls and manipulations of the DNS through various split DNS configurations. It's complicated and messy, but it's also a practice which is very widespread amongst the security professionals who are designing those environments. And that's the tough connection sometimes, is because you'll find little spins and little tweaks that are done in different practice areas around how this is adopted and deployed and made use of this technique, which makes it tricky.
Yeah. So if like generically, it might be quite commonplace but applied quite differently, say, as you said, in media production versus, I don't know, manufacturing or some other quite different sort of sector then.
Right. Well, and I used to work for a place that ran large amounts of manufacturing, and I'll tell you the infrastructure layout of that manufacturing floor, while those devices were able to interact with internet systems, it was very much through a layered set of very protocol-specific firewalls, but also DNS manipulation to allow them to have some behaviors, but you really undercut a lot of their other behaviors so that they couldn't be exploited either in or out, because these were facilities where downtime was measured in tens of thousands of dollars per minute.
Yeah, which makes good sense. Thanks, Glenn. And as you were saying that, I was wondering, actually, just I know there's some people on the call that have got experience, for example, of sort of protected sort of DNS environments. I don't know whether and how much Split Horizon applies in their worlds. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, who will be more knowledgeable about it than I am.
Andrew, Arnaud here. I don't know how to raise my hand, I'm afraid. So just to continue on Glenn's explanation here, in enterprise worlds, I've seen various use cases for Speed DNS. I mean, one had been for all the environments where you need to have test environments, staging environments, production environments. This is very common in production environments, in real enterprise environments to do that, especially on telcos, by the way. And this can be pretty complex. Another one I've seen was for really global deployments, where you have a lot of around the world environments where you need to switch from one, let's say, region or geography to another one. You have Split DNS involved there. I've seen it as well. So I'm in the security industry. So like Glenn is saying, there are plenty of niche areas where you need Split DNS. One of them was in association. I saw that in a customer very bizarrely in a steering traffic conditions when you move from working from home to working from corporate in specific conditions. So there are plenty. I mean, the at high level seems to look very homogeneous, but when you go really down to real environments, it's absolutely not. And the last one is about industrial environments, where you have a very, very draconian, industrial control systems and so on, where sometimes you need very specific type of flexibility in a very inflexible environment. Over.
Yeah, good points, Arlo. Thank you. I've seen no one's jumping in to talk about protected DNS, so we'll maybe move on from that. Although if anyone does have a view on that, again, feel free to put something in the chat or use Zoom to raise your hand. Or if you can't do either of those, then just unmute when there's a pause. That will be fine. Just going back to the ISP world, so operator world. I know Kevin touched on a really interesting example around education content. I'm also sort of thinking about in the sort of home environment where you've got a DNS forwarder and maybe want to do stuff sort of behind that, maybe to configure the router and such like. Again, that feels like that's probably using Split DNS, admittedly in a very small scale form compared to some of the enterprise applications. I don't know if any of the sort of operator participants on the call want to just maybe sort of comment on that.
I could maybe invite, sorry, to put him on the spot. I don't know if Gianpaolo is able to hear me. My colleague Gianpaolo, if you have any thoughts on that. So it's just a question on the on the fixed networks, the consumer premises equipment, and the extent to which we would have split DNS in that infrastructure.
So here is more limited, as the environment is commanded by CP. There are still applies the scenarios that you described, but in more limited way. Still, the legal framework is the same regarding the scenarios for education. It is more limited, as traffic is flat typically.
Yeah.
Here's Nick. I mean, we rely basically on the fact that the end user is able to find end systems which are locally connected to the CPE. So that's a standard way. We, for instance, if we have a kind of like a manual or something like that, we, of course, the IP address, private IP address of the home router is available, but also a name which is usually set inside DNS, and also for other systems. So if it's not only the router, but for instance, external 5G modem or something like that, that is usually also identified not only by IP addresses, but by names. So we need at least some kind of local namespace.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Nick and Gianpaolo. That's helpful to understand that. Are there any other types of application that sort of not covered off by the ones that have been mentioned so far, or do we have sort of most of the sort of broad categories covered? I'm not seeing any hands raised or comments in the chat this time, so I'm guessing that that's probably the bulk of them, which is helpful. We'll probably pause there, but hopefully that will be sort of useful context for the virtual interim session, just in terms of, you know, a range of different ways in which split DNS is used currently, and I suspect there's some quite different requirements coming out of some of those, so it's maybe not a generic thing, but it will at least give a sense of understanding of why it's important, and therefore a problem that does need to be solved through an appropriate mechanism. So thank you, Kevin, and others for your comments. All right, I'm going to just share my screen with a couple of other things to mention. So hopefully my screen has now appeared on yours. I'll just assume that it has just paged down. So just a few things I thought it would be useful to highlight. So since it's come up already, the virtual interim workshop, a reminder that that's taking place on Wednesday, scheduled to start at 1700 UTC and run through to around 1830. And focused around discovery of encrypted resolvers in a split DNS environment. So if you will, that's the problem that's trying to be resolved, no pun intended, during the session on Wednesday. Access is via Meet Echo. And I'll share these slides afterwards, but you also find this information in all three working group mailing lists, so ADD, DNSOP and DPrive, as well as no doubt other places on the IETF site as well, together with I think a draft agenda and some other background information, but at least those are the sort of key components of it. Also, this week, maybe even now, it wasn't an hour or so ago, but at some point in the next day or so, registration for IETF 113 in both Vienna and hybrid in March of this year should open up, and the early bird rate is open, I think, for roughly 2 weeks. And then it ratchets up to the standard rate and then the sort of late rate in succession. I'm not sure how it's going to run, but other than it's going to be hybrid, so it'd be similar but to the previous virtual only ones, but no doubt with some adaptations to reflect the fact that there will be hopefully a few hundred people present in Vienna as well. A couple of other news items just to highlight, which are on the sort of weekly headlines this week. Reports out on the recently discovered pseudonym DNS vulnerability. There's a sort of lot more detail on that. I put a link to there was a blog post on AppNick and RIPE as well, for that matter, just highlighting some of the key points from the report. So those of you interested in such matters should find that useful. The other sort of topical thing from the last 2 weeks, the European Union, you may recall, the European Commission more accurately, announced a plan back in December of 2020 to support the introduction of a new DNS resolver based within the EU as an alternative to those from other places. A call for proposals was launched on the 12th of January, which is not a huge document, about 30 pages, as I recall, with some annexes, but that covered several projects, not just DNS for EU. And then there was an information day last week on the 19th, just elaborating on some of the content of the call for proposals and giving people the opportunity to ask questions as well. I sort of gathered together sort of links to various material and a few other points at which are accessible through the first URL towards the bottom of this slide. And just as an observation, the transparency and privacy requirements of DNS for EU are pretty much consistent with those that we sort of pulled together in the European Resolver policy last year. So it's good to see that the Commission has taken those on board and embedded them in the requirements for DNS for EU, just as an aside. So if anyone's interested in more on that, then use the link towards the bottom of the slide. And as I say, I put some additional sort of detail there, plus links to the call for proposals, link to the recording from the information day, and various other bits and pieces, just to make it easily accessible in one place. And then two other things from me. Firstly, so probably better part of a year ago now, I think, if I sort of recollect, Kenji from Google came on to talk about Google's plans to support a private Prefetch proxy, which I always have problems pronouncing. And a few months previously to that, he shared some thoughts on how the Chrome browser would support encrypted client hello, ECH, sort of within the browser. I've swapped messages with Kenji, and he's happy in principle to sort of come back on and give an update on both of those, probably in around 2 to 3 weeks' time. So that will coincide with the milestone for the Prefetch proxy developments in particular. Given Kenji's based, as some of you may recall, in Tokyo, we will need to adjust the time of the call, so it will, I suspect, end up being earlier in the day, so still be on a Monday, but earlier in the day. And he has asked for input from people on what questions or areas you'd especially like him to cover, and that will sort of aid him in preparing for a call. So can I ask people to, if you've got any questions or concerns about either the private prefetch proxy or ECH in Chrome, please just drop me a line directly with those, and I'll, as I've done before, consolidate them all into a single document, which I'll obviously share with people, but in particular with Kenji, and then we'll use that to drive the call, which, as I say, should be in probably nearer 3 weeks than 2, but so roughly 3 calls time, give or take. So I hope that will be of interest, but yeah, do drop me a line with any questions or comments that you may have, or indeed, as I think that was Vinny has done, post them in the chat and I'll capture those after this call. So if there are any top of head ones you want to put in there, put them in the chat and I'll add those in as well. And then the other thing from me, just to let you know, in case you'd missed it, you'll recall last week that Eka sort of went through some highlights from his recent posts about DNS security, just putting out key points from at that point he'd posted on 4 topics, but he's subsequently put up the final version of the 5th topic that he sort of touched on, recursive to authoritative. The post wasn't available at the point of the call, but is now accessible. And again, I'll put the URL for that on the slide, which I'll circulate afterwards. So those of you with an interest in recursive to authoritative encryption, you can see Eka's thoughts on that at that link. Okay, that's everything I was going to run through on those topics this week. So let me just stop sharing. So I'll just open up and see if there's anything else that anyone else wanted to sort of bring up on the call this week. Anything of note that's occurred over the last week, or anything else in your minds, or indeed topics for future calls that you'd like to cover over and above developments in the Chrome browser. And as before, so raise your hand, put something in the chat, or indeed just unmute, whichever is easier. And whilst you're thinking, I think I saw John on the call. I don't know, John, whether there have been any further developments in the Quad 9. No, John, I don't think John is on the call, actually.
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, yeah, there you are. Sorry. I was scrolling through the alphabetical list. Any developments on that, or are you still waiting for the next round of the proceedings to?
We're really waiting for the next round of proceedings. We are filing the objection, as I think, or the next step in the injunction process. So no updates. It's probably going to be another month before there's anything reportable there. I actually did have something that I was going to comment on for this week. We're going to be keeping a relatively close eye on our Eastern European locations, seeing what, if any, testing or trials or even outright attacks there are as a lead up to what I'd call unsettled behavior in Europe. So that is going to be an interesting process, and we'll see if the DNS factors into any of that. But I would say to everyone on the call, shields up, as the saying goes.
That's probably sound advice, I would think, John. Just go back to the legal stuff. Is there anything from the community that will be useful at the moment?
Well, I guess we would still, we did post a while back an appeal for letters of support for those of you who have a stake in this. We would appreciate some comments from your particular corporation or even your individual perspectives. We kind of gave a template for that on the website, but of course you're welcome to write what you'd like. I expect that some of those documents may find their way into the court proceedings as statements of support or perspective from the DNS and technical community. So if anyone wants to continue adding some of those, we'd appreciate it.
Fine. Okay, I'll post a link to that or add a link to that to the slides before I circulate them, just in case anyone hasn't got that to hand. Thanks, John. And good advice on just being mindful of sort of developments in Eastern Europe currently, which yeah, are a bit more complex than split DNS, to say the least. I can see while we've been talking, Vinny's put a few sort of general points about stuff that would be interesting for Kenji to cover about Chrome, which I'll certainly put there, as well as also, I think, deep dive on Mask. Probably not a Chrome specific thing. I'd say that as maybe a suggestion for a topic for another call, Vinny, probably.
Yeah, it's general, although the Google folks are contributors to Mask, so I'm sure it'll end up in Chrome as some functionality. So might be good to just find out what the plans are on that. And of course, Private Relay leverages Mask today. So it'd be good to do a deep dive on that protocol and what the plans are and the impact on DNS in general, since host headers would be likely where, in other words, the proxy is likely going to be doing the DNS resolution versus the endpoint. So that has a clear implication on DNS. So that'd be good to maybe get sort of a deep dive on that and what the plans are, if possible. Thank you.
Yeah, duly noted. And maybe again separately, if anyone wants to let me know if they'd be suitably qualified to help on that topic, that'd be fantastic. Was you say you sound like you were volunteering, or maybe just clearing your throat, perhaps. Okay, any other points to raise from anyone else?
Andrew, you spoke about the ECH piece. So you say that you are going to discuss it in 2-3 weeks from now, right? Because Chrome is going to implement it or has implemented it, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe just to expand on that, Kenji came on the call quite a while back to just talk a little bit about the fact that ECH was likely to be implemented, support for ECH was likely to be implemented within the Chrome browser. Those of you that have been following the TLS working group will be aware that there's some interop testing running at the moment on the sort of current sort of spec of ECH current draft. It was up to draft 1.3. I'm not sure if it's gone beyond that yet, but sort of there or thereabouts. So the two topics that I asked Kenji to just give an update on were both sort of just clarify where Google are at with ECH, in anticipation that the standard will probably clear the working group sort of processes at some point this calendar year, so that it'd be timely to find out if Google's thinking of change at all. And then separately on private prefetch proxy, which I think is somewhat more advanced, and is at the sort of close to the point of being a sort of minimally viable product at this stage. So I think rather closer to sort of finding its way out into the wild, at least in a limited form, sometime quite soon. So that's what I give an update on, sort of both of those. So yeah, if you've got any questions on that you'd like them to cover, Arno, then feel free just to drop me an email or post any things you'd like them to cover in the chat, and I'll pick them up and share them with Kenji before that call. And thank you, Vinny, for a suggestion as to who would be a good person to talk about masks. Sorry, Arno.
I reach out to you offline, Andrew, because it's concerning.
Surely. And whilst I'm thinking about it, having done a report about ECH probably about 9 months ago, I'll post a link to that on the slides as well. Just if anyone wants to do a little bit of background sort of reading on ECH sort of prior to the session with Kenji.
But you have already posted a report. I don't know when it is from. Do you mean this is this one of 9 months ago?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, which isn't obviously Chrome specific, that's more general.
Yes, it's from June 2021.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on it. Okay, thank you. Very helpful.
You're welcome. Okay, anyone else with anything else you want to raise? Not seeing anything new in the chat. Can't see any hands raised, so it looks like not. So, okay, well, in which case, well, thank you, Kevin, for kicking us off with that sort of quick overview of some of the sort of use cases for split DNS. That was most helpful. And with luck, I guess a number of us will likely meet again on Wednesday at 5 p.m. UTC on the virtual interim session. So see you then, or if not then, same time next week. So have a great week, everyone. Thanks very much for your time.
Merci. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye. Cheers.